Hi, Brett.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. Are you
Excellent.
good?
Excellent. I'm good. I'm actually in the Palace Hotel in San Francisco because I have a conference I'm going to in just a minute or in an hour. So
Okay. All right. All right. Good.
nice to
Good.
see you. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I think we have over 100 people registered, which means if we get 50
Great.
coming, that's good. But we'll
Okay.
put it on YouTube channel of SoPE. We'll put it on the website. We'll get some more traction that way. And
Great.
you know that this is an iterative process where we tell them, we teach them, they make mistakes, and we do it again.
Of course. So let me ask you a question. Do you want this to be uh, a discussion, or do you want this to be my doing a presentation?
Maybe a little of both.
Okay.
So
Great.
let's start off with just, with your journey and how you got from point A to point B, and
Great.
what are the things you've done along the way, and then we can get
Great.
into things like um, fundraising, biggest issue for life science startups. Anything with life
Sure.
science and healthcare specifically. Um,
Great. Okay.
what do's and don'ts that you've seen, come by your plate in the last 30
Okay.
years that you can say, hey, do this,
Sure.
don't do this.
Sure.
Governance, big issue,
Yeah.
what to do with boards
Great.
and how to handle that. What are
Great.
the common issues that people have seen
Yeah.
and and need some guidance with?
Okay. And are you going to act as moderator and ask
Yes.
questions of me? Okay,
Yeah.
great. Perfect.
And then, and if you have anything that you want to present along the way, just go ahead and do it.
Okay, great. Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm fine with the organic discussion actually. So, but I do have some, but I do have some prepared material we could do if we want.
Sure,
But I like,
sure.
I like a good organic discussion. So
Good.
great.
All right. So let's see if we have anybody showing up. Yes, we have 12 participants already on. So we'll wait another minute or two. And
Yeah, no problem. And where are you today?
I am at my home in outside of Washington, D.C.
Outside of DC. Got it.
Yeah.
Very nice.
For all those that are on the call, on the webinar today, give us another minute or two so we can gather some more attendees, and then we'll get started as soon as possible. If you do have questions during this discussion with Bret, please put them into the chat. If I can see them, and I should be able to see them, then I will bring up your questions. And if not, if you can email me at jhausfeld@biofactura.com, and I'll be happy to answer them. It's HAUSFELD. All right, I think we have a quorum to get us started. So welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this webinar. It is a fireside chat with Bret Waters, the Silicon Valley guy. And if any of you have read any of Bret's missives, you'll understand why I invited him to be a guest today. He has a great sense of humor. He has certainly been around the block a few times. He understands what it means to sit in the shoes of an entrepreneur and start something from scratch and succeed and fail, and understands what it means to help others reach success and pinnacles that we all are striving for. So for those of you who haven't been to the SoPE webinars before, SoPE is a non-for-profit organization. We have over 33,000 LinkedIn members across the world with chapters all over the world. COVID has really changed the nature of the in-house meetings, the in-person meetings, but we are going to go back to that model this summer, most likely in many of our communities. But until then, we will try to continue to bring you these webinars on at least a quarterly basis, sometimes more often than that. So check out the SoPE website, SoPEnet, SoPEnet.org. Join the organization for $80 a month and $80 a year, excuse me, $80 a year. We've made it very reasonable so entrepreneurs can feel like they're getting a good value for their money and participation. So with no further ado, let me introduce Bret Waters to our audience today. Bret, it is a pleasure to have you here with us. Please introduce yourself to the group and tell them about your journey.
I'm actually sitting in a hotel lobby in San Francisco, so I hope the audio quality is okay.
You're good.
Great. So I've been in Silicon Valley my whole life. I was born in a town called Los Gatos, which is about a half an hour south of Stanford, and spent my entire life in Silicon Valley. And I've been pretty much immersed in the whole world of startups and entrepreneurship and innovation. And 3 times I've been through the process of founding a company, raising capital, being a CEO, and eventually managing the sale of the company, sometimes under good circumstances and sometimes under more challenging circumstances. And today I teach at Stanford University. I teach entrepreneurship at Stanford. And I'm involved with a startup accelerator program called the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And it's for startups that are going to change the world, kind of mission-driven startups. Plus, I run a little startup accelerator program of my own called Fourthly. And so that's kind of me. I'm just a Silicon Valley guy immersed in the world of startups and innovation and venture capital. And super happy to be here with you guys today.
Thank you so much, Bret. So, Bret, what have you seen in your journeys that have raise the hair on the back of your neck and say, gee, this was not a smart thing to do? And what can you share with the entrepreneurs who are with us today so that they don't make the same mistakes?
Well, the biggest mistake I made in my career as a startup founder, that now has become a topic that I preach about at Stanford all the time, is that during the dot-com boom, late 1999, I raised a $5 million round of venture capital for what I thought was an awesome idea. And the fact that I was able to raise capital for it easily kind of proved to me that it must be an awesome idea. And then I took that $5 million, I hired a bunch of sharp software engineers and sold them on my awesome idea. And we spent 2 years building what we were sure was an awesome product. And then after 2 years of building what we were sure was an awesome product, we launched it, and turns out customers didn't really think it was that awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wish I had that $5 million back, and I know my investors do too. And
Right.
And so the life lesson there for me that I now preach is I should have taken that $5 million, put it in the bank, and spent the next 6 months just out talking to customers and understanding customers' needs to make sure we were building a product that was aligned with, the real world expectations of customers, as opposed to just what I thought was awesome.
So that's really the I-Core model, where they put you in front of 100 potential customers, and they tell you, go ask them a list of questions and then come back and let's evaluate it and see whether or not this idea is just something in your head or really is needed in the marketplace.
Over and over again, right? We've seen companies spend a whole lot of time and money and effort building a product that the company is sure is going to be a success, and the product totally fails, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I did it with $5 million, but we've all seen it happen out there with $100 million being put toward something that that the founders were absolutely sure was going to be a success, and then it wasn't. And
So it's a little different in healthcare and life sciences, because because their failures are usually due to clinical trials that just don't give you the kind of endpoints that you're looking for. It's not that it wouldn't be great in the marketplace; is that the drug just didn't work to your expectations, or the device didn't work to your expectations. And
Right,
that's
right.
a unique space.
Yeah, healthcare, I don't need to tell this audience that healthcare is a difficult business. Because it's very complicated in terms of, the customer is the patient, except that the patient isn't the payer. The payer is a third party payer, and the physician is the decision maker. And so it's a very complicated ecosystem, as you know far better than I do. But still, many of the concepts that I teach still apply, right, in terms of build a small prototype, go through the clinical trial. I mean, the clinical trials are basically kind of like a prototyping session, right? Of get something out there in the real world and it's used so that you can learn from that.
Mhm.
And uh, and I'm sure that in your business, there's lots of examples of new medical devices or new drugs that have failed because not enough time really understanding kind of the needs of the physician or the needs of the healthcare system or the needs of the payers, right?
Well,
And so I think
that was
the
really
same general concepts apply.
that was really the driving force behind SoPE. When Steve Levine, Arlen Myers, and I started it 12 years ago, it was, people are creating these new devices and digital applications and new drugs without really having a physician at the table. And we know what we have in our toolbox. We know what we need. We know what our patients need. We should have a seat at the table. And that's why we decided to create the organization. And hopefully it has helped make many connections over the last decade that will improve innovation and commercialization of ideas.
Perfect. That's absolutely perfect. And I always tell my students that one of the great things about being an entrepreneur in 2023 is that, it's easy to reach out to people and get input today, right? That, these days, if you're developing some new product, and you'd like to talk to some industry experts to, kind of test out your idea and see whether or not it's viable, it's pretty easy to find people on LinkedIn who are industry experts who you can reach out to. Whereas, a generation ago, that was harder. And so, I assume that one of the benefits of an organization like yours is exactly what you said, that it makes it a lot easier to connect with industry experts who can help to inform your decision-making process, your product development process, et cetera.
Yeah. So, the three big topics that always come up in life science startups are money, money, and money. Where to get it, how to get it, how not to annoy people in the course of trying to get it, and then capital structure within the organization itself, and then governance. So finance, capital structure, and governance are three big topics that we struggle with, because coming from a science and healthcare background, that's not inherently integrated into our DNA. Some of us, yes, but some of us, no. So what can you tell us now in terms of capital raising in a volatile environment where there's a lot of demand for capital, but venture capitals and institutional investors are reluctant to put money into startups now, much more so than they were in previous years, and valuations have really come down as a result.
Yeah, valuations today are dramatically different than they were, 18, 24 months ago. No doubt about that. I think overall it's a good thing because valuations were way overheated. So I think that they've come down a little is probably good for the overall ecosystem. But if you're a founder who was thinking about raising money 2 years ago and you're out raising money now, you're kicking yourself because the valuation you're going to get today is probably going to be half of what it might have been 2 years ago. But that just is what it is. With regard to financing activity, it's way off in growth stage rounds. So, so Series D, Series E, those are way off. Early stage financings are holding up pretty well, seed in particular. I think there's approximately as many seed financings going on right now as there were, a year or two ago. So the good news for those of you who are early stage is that there's still plenty of financing going on, but still plenty of there's a lot of capital out there, waiting to play. So it's not so much that it's more difficult to raise seed financing today. It's that it's going to be at lower valuations, and it's likely to take a little longer. We were kind of during the frenzy 2 years ago, there were people pitching on Tuesday and getting a term sheet on Thursday and closing it by Friday, right? And that's not going to happen in 2023. It's a much more considered investment decision with a little deeper due diligence in 2023 than it was in 2021. But there's still plenty of capital flowing.
So what's the time frame that entrepreneurs should anticipate spending in a due diligence phase from the time of engagement to the time of signing a deal and getting a check in the bank?
Right. So first of all, fundraising always takes longer than you think it's going to. I always warn founders of that. Whatever you think it's going to be, it'll be longer than that. And with regard to diligence, that's obviously pretty stage dependent, right? Because the earlier stage you are, the less things there are to do diligence on, because there isn't much in the way of financial history or anything else. Whereas if you've been running for 2 or 3 years, the diligence takes a little longer just because there's more things to dig into. But I think a typical kind of cycle these days would be, term sheet gets issued, and then there's 60 to 90 days of diligence, I think would be a typical cycle.
Okay, that's faster than I had thought, because that's really what it has been for the last several years. And that's good for people to understand that that's a normal cycle. What are the things that you've seen that really have been successful in terms of fundraising, and what's been really a disaster?
Well, first of all, it's all about storytelling, right? That great entrepreneurs are great at telling a crisp, clear, and compelling story. That's the reality. And so that's the first thing I'll say is storytelling skills matter. Of course, most people think of pitching, and of course they think of fundraising, but the reality is that entrepreneurs are pitching all the time for all kinds of reasons, right? They're pitching for customers, they're pitching for partnerships, they're pitching for for clinical partners, they're pitching for all kinds of things. And so that ability to tell that crisp, clear, and compelling story is something that every entrepreneur has to have. Then as a friend of mine who's a venture capitalist says, he says, what I'm really looking for is a just add money opportunity, meaning, he's looking for an opportunity where the entrepreneur has already kind of de-risked all the things that can be de-risked. And, now we just add some money and it scales up. Now, there isn't any deal that's quite that perfect, but it's kind of worth thinking about that. That's really what an investor is looking for, right? Is something where the entrepreneur's done all the hard work, and now I just got to add money to this thing and it'll blossom. Somebody in chat asks about, so Miranda in chat asks about revenue, and the fact that often with medical stuff, often you need some money to develop the product, but the revenue is going to be several years out, right? I think that's not uncommon in medical field. Let's see. So Miranda says, we allow pushback from investors because we need FDA approval before we will be able to generate revenue. Yeah, I think that's just the nature of the beast, isn't it, Miranda? And so I guess what that means is you need investors who are savvy in your field. Because a software investor thinks you can, build this thing in, over the summer and be generating revenue by fall, and that's not going to be the case with a medical product. So I think the answer to Miranda's question is just simply, this is why it's important to be talking to investors who kind of understand your particular space.
And that sometimes is very difficult. Finding not as difficult here as it is in Europe. Europe is much more generalist investors, Here you have investors that are so incredibly sophisticated who come from either the biotech, the medtech,
Right.
the digital app world and go to the venture capital world, that they know
Right.
exactly where you are and what you're doing and
Right.
can do their due diligence very granularly. So you better
Right.
have it really tight.
Right. Right. So around here, pretty much all venture capital firms have a stage and sector focus. So in other words, we're focused on late stage biotech, or we're focused on, early stage consumer software. So pretty much all firms, and certainly all individual funds, because some of the big firms might have multiple funds they're managing, right? So every fund has a stage and sector focus. And so, the first thing you need to do is make sure you're pitching the right firms that, that you're, and I see this happen all the time, that people are trying to cold call venture capital firms that are just not a stage and sector match for what it is that their startup is doing.
Right.
Again, in 2023, that's pretty easy to research, right? You can, most firms have a website. You can find the partners on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to know what their stage and sector focus is and make sure that you are focused on ones that are well aligned with what you're doing.
When you're dealing with seed equity,
Yep.
what's your take on the participation of the CEO as sweat equity versus real capital in the company?
I don't think it matters. I also don't think it matters. I think that, obviously there are some founding CEOs who, have the capacity to, put a million or $2 million of their own capital in to start it. And there are an awful lot who don't have that capacity. So I don't think it really matters. And of course, the one thing I always warn new founders about is, when you go and raise your first round of venture capital, one of the things they're going to put into the term sheet is the idea that your founder's stock is going to go onto a vesting schedule, and you will have to earn it over the next 4 years, right? And you're going to say, no, you don't understand. I already own that stock. I founded the company. I already own that stock. And they're going to say, yeah, we want you to put it on a vesting schedule. You're going to have to earn it back over the next 4 years. And you're going to be like, wait, what? How is that fair?
Right.
And the reason, of course, is they want to, if they're going to fund the company, they want to know that the CEO is going to stick around. And so it's a perfectly good reason why they do it, but it's going to seem totally unfair to you at the time. And so I think my point is that whether that's going to be true, whether a bunch of the initial capital was yours or not, it could be true that they're going to want you to kind of, as a retention device, they're going to want to put your stock on a vesting schedule.
And what about the formation of the company with other founders? What I've seen that's raised the hairs on the back of my neck is that you give out these shares, these founder shares, which are good in perpetuity, even if founders leave the organization in a year or two, and then you're sitting with founders who have a significant portion of the company that really have nothing to do with the company and had nothing to do with the company for a decade.
Yeah. So this is precisely why you always put stock grants onto a vesting schedule. So if there's some leading physician out there who having them on your advisory board will carry a lot of weight, and so you offer them 2% of the company for being on your advisory board, put that 2% of the company on a 4-year vesting schedule that they have to serve on the advisory board for 4 years in order to get that. And that if they stop participating, then you just simply terminate that, and now they get a fraction of the original amount. So everybody you give stock to, make sure you put it on a vesting schedule, because what you just said, Jeff, happens all the time. That there are people who say, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to help you. Give me 5% of the company and I'll really help you. And then you give them 5% of the company, you never hear from them again.
Right.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, and especially in healthcare and life sciences, because physicians and healthcare providers are naive when it comes to unscrupulous business people, and we think everybody's here to help us, and you know what? They're not. So you have to keep your eyes open. We did have another question about female minority entrepreneurs and their difficulty in sometimes raising funds because of some bias issues that are
Yep.
definitely there.
Yep. It's a great question. And I would feel subconscious about being the old white guy answering this question. But so here's the thing is that historically something like 3% of all venture capital has gone to female founders historically. And there's been lots of discussion about that and why is that and how do we change it? And the same, of course, is true of non-white people as well. So the historical facts on this are pretty clear and they're pretty depressing. The good news is that it's changing pretty rapidly. And here is the reason it is changing, I think, is that during most of my career, the general partners at venture capital firms were all gray-haired white guys who went to either Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School. Literally, all the general partners at venture capital firms were middle-aged white guys who went to one of those two business schools. Today, if you look at the general partners at the large VC firms in Silicon Valley and elsewhere, you'll see a tremendous diversity compared to what it was, even 10 years ago. And so that's the reason why I think this is changing pretty quickly is that, so human nature is that once we've had success in our life, we tend to think success looks like us, right? That becomes kind of the way, consciously or unconsciously, we think success looks like us. And so, when the VCs were all, white guys that came from those two schools, they tended to consciously or unconsciously, when they got pitches all day long, they would tend to go all in on the guys that reminded them of themselves, right? That's just kind of human nature. And so we're now, pretty dramatically changing that unconscious bias simply by the fact that the investing partners at most VC firms today are far more diverse than they once were. Lots and lots of women, lots of certainly a lot of Asians, a lot of South Asians, and increasingly African Americans. And so, as I said, if you go to the websites of Sequoia Capital and Andreessen Horowitz and even Kleiner Perkins, you'll see much more diversity amongst the investing partners than ever before. And so I'm hoping, anonymous attendee, because I see a name on that comment, but I'm hoping that the issue you brought up, I'm hoping is much less of a problem today and tomorrow than it was even 10 years ago. And of course, the other thing is that we have a lot more examples now of very successful female founders. And so, all an investor cares about is likelihood of success, right? That's all an investor cares about is I'm going to put this money in, and what are the chances that I'm going to get a bunch of money back out? And today we've got, Katrina Lake founded Stitch Fix, and she took Stitch Fix public at the age of 34, youngest woman to ever take a company public. Katie Hahn is one of the most successful venture capitalists out there. Sheryl Sandberg is now an active investor. And by the way, there are Sheryl built out the advertising platform at Google, and then she left and built the advertising platform at Facebook. Today, the largest advertising platform in the entire world is Google. The second largest advertising platform in the entire world is Facebook, and Sheryl Sandberg built them both.
There you go.
So the point is that it's a much more diverse world today in terms of the success that's going on out there. And that's what investors care about, is success.
Well, we do have a question from a SoPE member and female entrepreneur, Cheryl, asked about how do you handle the need for 250,000 capital investment for domestically based injection molds to get the cost of goods to a reasonable price before you can sell your product? In other words, how do you approach a VC without traction?
Maybe it's Cheryl.
Yeah.
So that's basic capital investment, right? We're going to need capital investment of $250,000 for the molds in order to get our production costs down to X, right? So the there's lots of different ways to finance that. That's, so traditionally that is actually not what venture capitalists do. Traditionally, that's what a bank does, or that's what a leasing company does, or sometimes it's customer financing. In other words, the mold maker, in this case, maybe would finance it for you. So a $250,000 piece of capital equipment is typically something that'll come from a source other than venture capitalists. But having said that, it's certainly possible that you could find a VC who would make this investment in return for X% of the company. If you had a really compelling story about how this mold is going to allow us to make this thing for a price of X, and we think we can sell 10,000 of them in the next 2 years.
Right. But certainly you would be more likely to raise that kind of money from friends, family, high net worth individuals.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So I'm glad you brought this up, Jeff. This is another good point, is that, so in Silicon Valley, we talk about VCs and angels, right? Angel investors. And the difference is really pretty simple, which is that a venture capitalist is investing from a fund that they've raised, right? So they went out, they raised a fund, bunch of institutions and family offices and pension plans put money into the fund. And then the general partners of the fund go out and invest that money. And at the end of the fund's life, which is typically 10 years, 80% of the profits in the fund get returned to the limited partners who put money into the fund. And 20% of the profits go to the general partners who did all the work. That's the standard VC model. And so a venture capital investor has a fiduciary responsibility to the people who actually put the money into the fund. They're not investing in their own money, right? And so, at the quarterly meetings with the limited partners, they got to be able to justify each individual investment and show the diligence and yada, yada, yada. An angel investor is investing his or her own money. And so there is no fiduciary responsibility to anybody other than your spouse. And so that's why an early stage investment like this, the first $250,000 in, is more likely to come from an angel investor, an individual, or a group of individuals, because since they're investing their own money, they can just make that gut level investment decision. I met Cheryl. I like Cheryl. She seems passionate. She seems smart. I'm going to help her buy those molds, and I think this thing might fly. Whereas a VC investor really can't make that kind of gut level leap of faith, because he's not investing his own money, he's investing somebody else's money. So that's why early stage, super early stage, seed level is typically individuals, angel investors, or groups of individuals.
Right. When, so the typical scenario is that the entrepreneur will go out and try to raise some seed money from friends, family, high net worth individuals. When should that entrepreneur kind of raise their hand and say, okay, I give up, I'm going to go to an investment banker?
Let's see. The question would be, if you couldn't convince friends and family to invest, then what makes you think that like an investment banker, is going to find people to invest? I guess
It could be just that particular entrepreneur may not be as
They don't have
charismatic
access.
or
Yeah.
a great storyteller. Maybe a fantastic scientist.
Right. Yeah, I'd say go find a co-founder who's a good storyteller.
Okay.
Just because I do think that I do think that storytelling skills end up being important in running a company.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of different sources and structures of capital today, right? So there's crowdfunding sites available. There's all kinds of especially in your field, there's all kinds of government money available sometimes for innovation in the medical field, and foreign funds are now investing in U.S. startups. I mean, there's more sources and structures of capital than ever before, and so I would say continue working in your personal network. And ask for introductions. And I'm also a big fan of using LinkedIn to just find somebody who looks like they might be an influential contact for you to have. Send them a LinkedIn message and say, I'm working on a new startup. I wonder if you could just give me 20 minutes of your time. I'd love to just tell you about my startup and get your feedback. And people are often, people for the most part want to be helpful, right? And so, if you flatter them a little bit and say, you look like a leading expert in the field, I'd love to hear
Right.
your feedback. And then they may see your little pitch and say, this is really interesting. My brother Bob invests in this area. Would you mind if I introduce you to him?
Mhm.
You just never know when you're going to get introductions like that. And of course, warm introductions are always far more likely to result in a check than cold calling. And so, that's what I would do. I would just really work your personal network hard, and expand your personal network by using LinkedIn, asking for referrals, et cetera. And I think that if you do that, you will eventually get introduced to the right person to invest in your startup.
So let's say that the company is further along than seed or Series A and is trying to raise $10+ million, and it can't really find the right people to get to, so they decide to use an investment banker. Is there something that you should have in your vetting process in terms of who to choose in that investment banking universe?
I honestly, in my own career, I've only used investment bankers for M&A. I've used investment bankers when I've sold companies. I've never used them for raising capital. And that may be a West Coast, East Coast thing.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And
So in terms of vetting investment bankers, I don't think I'm an expert in that.
and what about family offices? We all hear about family offices. What's
Yeah.
your take on family offices? How do you get to them, and how do you identify the decision makers in them? And has that model changed? Has the family office hired VC-like managers? So really talking to a family office is like talking to a VC.
Yeah. So that is exactly the way in which the family office business has changed. Is that a generation ago, a family office would never make direct investments in startups. They might allocate some of the capital into various venture funds or various private equity funds, but they wouldn't do any direct investing in startups. Whereas today, you often see family offices do direct investing in startups. So that's the big change in my career. Finding them is hard because kind of just by their nature, they're under the radar. And again, warm introductions is what you're looking for. And with a little bit of effort online, you should be able to get some sense of what their what their investment focus is or what things the family is interested in, right? But they are harder to find. As I said, by their very nature, they are under the radar. Whereas VC firms have a website. They have, they show up at conferences. They often write blog posts. They want a profile because they want the deal flow.
Sure.
Family offices, for the most part, don't. Yeah.
So we had a question here from Erwin about being a clinician and an investor. Is there enough time? What do you think about physicians as investors? And what can they, and another question was, what can you expect from being an angel investor? What kind of return can you expect? That's a very broad question, but I'll just throw it out there for you to juggle with a little bit.
Yeah. So here's the thing about startup investing is that you need some diversification in order to mitigate the risk, right? In other words, if you invest in 2 startups, your chances of losing all your money is pretty high. If you invest in 10 startups, you've got a little better chance because maybe 80% of them will fail, but the other 2 will be hits, right? you invest in 20 startups, now you're starting to get enough distribution of risk that, maybe you'll come out ahead. And this is the big advantage that VCs have always had over individual investors, is that VCs have the distribution of risk thing going for them. So that's the first thing I would say is don't get into angel investing unless you get the capacity to make several bets so that you're distributing your risk a little bit. If you make one or two, your chances of losing that money are super high. With regard to returns expected, I think that's kind of all over the place. So I don't think I would want to give any expectations on returns. But I will say this, that the time horizon is longer than most people think. I believe I saw some data on this the other day, and I think the average time horizon from a seed investment in a startup to investor liquidity on average is about 12 years. So
even for tech firms?
Yeah, even for tech firms.
That's interesting because the perception is that healthcare and life sciences are not as attractive because it takes us too long.
Yeah.
Because it usually takes us 10 to 15 years.
Right. But it's true across the board. You look at, even I think Uber and Airbnb were both 12, 13 years from seed funding to IPO liquidity. Those are huge hits. Those are huge hits, right? So you had to wait 12 years, but you got your money back 100 to 1, so you're happy.
Yeah.
But that's still, there's this mythology that the tech investing gets you these quick returns. But I actually don't think the data backs that up.
Interesting.
So my point is don't go into angel investing thinking you're going to be getting quick returns, because it's not.
Doesn't happen.
No.
Correct. Been there, done that. Doesn't happen. Tell us about your experience with entrepreneurs and choosing boards, either board of directors or advisory boards. What are the qualities that we should be looking for? What are the qualities we should be trying to steer away from?
Yeah. Well, so, there's the old expression about how on boards you want the three W's, which is wisdom, wealth, and workers. So you want some people are on the board because they're wise and really know the sector well. You want some people on the board because they can write checks and know people who can write checks. And you want some people on the board because they're workers, because they'll pitch in and help and do whatever they can possibly do to be helpful to you. And so, you want some mix of the three W's on your board.
Right.
Advisory boards are a little trickier because, I'm always, when I see the advisory board slide in a pitch deck, I'm always kind of cynical about that, skeptical about that, because, those are all impressive people up there on that slide with a lot of degrees, but are they really going to be active in helping this company succeed, or is their picture just there because they got handed 1% of the company in return for their picture being there on the slide? So I think that if you can put together an advisory board that genuinely adds value, then do so, and hold quarterly meetings with the advisory board or whatever the right cycle is. Make sure you put the whatever equity you've given them, make sure you put it on a vesting schedule, such that if they miss 2 of the quarterly advisory board meetings, you assume that they're no longer active, and use that as a mechanism for keeping them active. So I guess that's my thought on advisory boards, is that they can be great if they actually provide value to the organization, but I've often seen them be, they're not really active, they're not really providing any value. You just gave away 4 or 5% of the company recruiting people to be on your advisory board slide without ever getting any value out of it. Now, with regard to the actual board and governance, if you have outside investors, venture investors, they will likely, they may well want a board seat, right? So that becomes part of the negotiation on the term sheet is board representation. And they may well want some governance built in. I mean, it's typical to have kind of simple governance with things like, any expense under $100,000, the CEO has complete discretion on. Any expense over $100,000 requires board approval or whatever, however you want to set that. Pretty common, easy governance. No reason to push back on that. You certainly don't want, for you as the founding CEO, you don't want board governance to be something that's holding you back. You don't want your ability to sprint forward and make this thing a success to be restrained by the fact that everything requires board approval. But I think for the most part, I don't think investors want that either. So I've never had any problem kind of negotiating a level of governance that makes everybody happy.
Probably right, but it's one of those necessary evils that we have to put in place. So you mentioned about a slide deck and some skepticism. What's been the biggest turnoff as a potential investor, or your startups that you're looking at, in a slide deck that you've seen that you can tell our audience, don't do this because it will turn people off? And what's been a later turnoff to companies during due diligence?
Don't ever put in your slide deck that you have no competition, because if you put in your slide deck that you have no competition, that either means there's no market demand for what you're doing, or it means you don't know how to use Google search, because there's competition out there for everything. And I always also tell my students, when you're doing your competitive analysis, remember that it's not just competitors, it's also alternative ways of solving the problem that you solve, right? And that's certainly true in your field, that you may be developing a new medical device, for example, that maybe this doesn't exist yet, but there probably are alternative ways of doing what this device does, right? And so when you're looking at the landscape of competitors, remember to also think of it as being the landscape of competitors and alternatives. And don't say to an investor, we have no competition, because it's just not credible.
Right.
An investor is going to be much more impressed if you have done your homework on what the landscape looks like in terms of competitors and alternatives, and you kind of understand how you fit into that landscape. So within that landscape, we're going to be the least expensive, or we're going to be the one that has the best outcomes in this particular area, or whatever. So it's not a matter of trying to convince an investor that there is no competition. It's a matter of convincing an investor that you've done your homework on the landscape of competitors and alternatives, and you kind of understand where you plan to fit into that landscape. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, before you go into the pitch meeting, make sure you look up everybody who's going to be in that room from the firm. Look them up on LinkedIn and understand their background. I was actually in a pitch meeting once recently where the entrepreneur was a 25-year-old guy, whiz kid guy, and one of the venture partners who was in the room was a woman who has a PhD in artificial intelligence. And this young 25-year-old guy comes in to pitch us, and he turns to this woman and he says, I don't know how much you know about AI, so I'll try to make this simple. And she's got a PhD in AI.
Yep. That's a big one.
So, point is that, again, in today's day and age, it's really easy to look people up and get an idea of their backgrounds before the meeting. And you will have far more success if A, you don't say stupid things, and B, you can really target what you're saying and target all the exciting things about your startup to the backgrounds of the people who are in the room. And let's see, then your other question was about diligence. So, so a big thing on the mind of everybody these days is is employee relationships and unknown liabilities from current or past employees. Everybody's heard stories of, a company where the investor makes a large investment, and then 6 months later, some disgruntled former employee of that company, sues for $10 million. And not only is that costly, it also bogs down the CEO and the whole organization, right? Because the CEO wants to be sprinting toward getting a product on the market, and instead the CEO is spending half of each day in depositions because of this disgruntled employee lawsuit.
Right.
And so, I think that's one important piece of advice these days is, just make sure you've got everything buttoned up in general, but especially buttoned up on the employee side. So make sure, when you hire people, make sure they sign employment agreements, make sure they sign invention assignment agreements. Because the other thing, especially in the tech world, is, the VC is obviously part of what they're investing in the tech world is your technology, your intellectual property. And if 6 months later, it turns out that one of the employees says, hey, I actually own that code. I owned that code before I came to work for the company. And all of a sudden there's a big IP battle with one of the employees over who owns the code. That scares the crap out of investors. So, all employees should, sign an IP assignment agreement when they join the company, saying that they understand that all the code that they're writing while they're employed by the company belongs to the company.
Right.
Exactly. So it's really important to have all that stuff as clean and tidy as possible.
Yeah, which speaks to the fact that you really need to have a lawyer that understands startups in healthcare and life sciences specifically, so that you can cover these bases and not get caught.
Yeah.
You mentioned AI and machine learning, and that's a big topic in healthcare and life sciences now, just like blockchain was a few years ago. So how much of it is trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, and how much of it is real and will be helpful to companies that adopt the technology or that are starting companies based on the technology?
You're talking about the whole AI craze right now?
Yep.
Yeah. So there's an old joke that venture capitalists are what you get when you cross sheep with lemmings, because they all flock together and then they all commit mass suicide together. And we've seen this happen a number of times. And right now it's all about AI, right? So right now investors all want to get in on AI. And there was a Wall Street Journal piece last week saying that the AI space is already overfunded. That it's overfunded, and anybody who puts any more money into it right now is crazy. So I think I don't know. My general advice on this topic is don't build a startup around what you think investors like. Build a startup around what you think customers will buy. Build your startup around building a great product that will be successful in the marketplace. Don't build your startup around what you think investors like. It's kind of a bass backwards way to do it. So that's my general advice on the topic.
There are some healthcare AI applications that are really very intriguing.
Sure.
Like have a patient in the ICU, they could tell whether a patient is going to develop sepsis 6 to 8 hours before they actually develop sepsis, or who will go into hypoglycemic shock 10 hours before they're actually going to go into hypoglycemic shock, or how to manage a patient's medication based on their previous history of use of the medication and the outcomes. So there are some really compelling potential uses for AI, but for the entrepreneur that wants to embrace this in their technology or think they need to incorporate that into their deck, what's your advice?
Well, so the use cases you just described are basically examples of predictive analytics, right? That, that with predictive analytics, we can know that a patient is likely to go into this long before they are. I worked with a startup once that was doing this on congestive heart failure. That they did a trial where each time a patient was discharged from the hospital after having congestive heart failure, they were given a tablet, and they were several times a day they were supposed to answer the questions that the tablet asked. And then this data was broadcast back to the physician's dashboard, and the physicians would know when somebody was at risk for rehospitalization in advance, and it dramatically reduced costs, yada yada yada. So there's lots and lots of examples of AI in medicine, and in particular predictive analytics in medicine. And so, yeah, I mean, I think but again, put that in there because it makes a great product. Don't put it in there because you think investors will like it. I think that's my advice.
That's a great message. While I'm asking you these last couple of questions, Bret, if there are any other questions from the audience who's listening, please put them in the Q&A box. We'll take a look at them. The recent banking crisis that has occurred in your backyard has affected the entire industry. What's your take, and how do we respond to that? How do we react to that in a positive way? Can we?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not a banking sector expert, but yeah, what happened to Silicon Valley Bank was fascinating. And that Friday, I got a bunch of phone calls that Friday from startup founders telling me that all of their money was at Silicon Valley Bank, and payroll was going to be due on Monday, and they had no idea how the hell they were going to meet payroll. And luckily, over the weekend, the regulators, did what they did, and payroll was able to be met on Monday. What happened at Silicon Valley Bank was really just basically an old-fashioned bank run. Just like the bank run in what's that movie? It's a Wonderful Life, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
The only difference is that this was driven or amplified by social media.
That's exactly right. So you nailed it exactly. So this was just simply an old-fashioned bank run. What made it different was social media, and Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the largest venture capital firms, they supposedly, one of the partners there became very concerned when they heard that Silicon Valley Bank might be having a liquidity issue, and so Andreessen Horowitz used a WhatsApp group where I think there were 1,000 startup founders in this WhatsApp group, and this partner at Andreessen Horowitz posted in this WhatsApp group with 1,000 startup founders, "You all better get your money out of Silicon Valley Bank because I heard they may be having a liquidity issue." That's a bank run, and they had I forget the numbers. Was it something like $42 billion within 24 hours?
One day, right?
In withdrawal requests. There's not a bank in the world that could withstand that.
Right.
So that's the bottom line on Silicon Valley Bank. Some people, of course, the story got reported as if there was something wrong with Silicon Valley, and that this was the end of Silicon Valley, and that all these bad decisions being made in Silicon Valley and stuff. And it didn't really have much to do with any of that. It just simply was an old-fashioned bank run, and that the reason Silicon Valley Bank was so exposed was because since they were the favored bank of venture funded startups, they were sitting on a whole lot of cash. So in other words, you raise $100 million from Sequoia Capital, you put it into your accounts at Silicon Valley Bank.
Right.
And so they just had a lot of cash. And of course, the FDIC limit on the insurance is $250,000. And so, there was a lot of cash that was sitting there that was beyond the FDIC limit. And that's a unique situation. And there's going to be some changes that are being made, obviously, around this. But like I said, I'm not a banking sector expert.
So when you raise cash, and hopefully everyone here is going to be able to raise cash, where do you put it?
Right.
When you raise it?
Well,
Do you have to split it up into 18 different banks?
Right. So I've noticed, so since the Silicon Valley collapse, Silicon Bank collapse, I've been getting a lot of solicitations from other money deposit companies saying things like, put your money with us. We have $3 million in deposit insurance. And I actually don't know exactly how that works, whether those banks are kind of aggregators that then split the money up amongst multiple banks, or are they actually buying private insurance to cover up that amount? I actually don't know.
They might be, and if they are, then you're paying for it, by
Then
a
you're paying for
reduced,
it. Exactly.
with a reduced interest rate.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
But this is, so the good news is that if you raise a big pile of money, you should be able to hire a treasury manager, even if it's a consulting treasury manager, who this is what they do, is they figure out what's the, if you're going to be sitting on 8 or 9 figures, what's the best way to sit on that.
So one of the questions that just came up was, how did so many people withdraw so much money in such a short time when depositor terms of services limit the amount that can be withdrawn in any time period? Obviously, Silicon Valley didn't have that.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I do. But I do know. I know a founder, a good friend of mine, he actually went down on that, I guess it must have been that Thursday. I think they were closed on the Friday. That Thursday, he went down and to get his money out, and he walked out of there with a cashier's check for $20 million. I've never heard of walking in and asking for a cashier's check for $20 million, but that's what he did.
I got it. One last question about telehealth and mental health startups. Any insights there?
Well, you guys know far more about this than I do. I think that telehealth is one of those things that's had promise for a long time, and then COVID was obviously a forcing function, right? That all of a sudden physicians and patients had to use telehealth, and so I think there's been a lot of there's a lot more acceptance now telehealth, both from physicians and from patients. Again, you guys know far more about this than I do. But I do think it's an exciting area, and it's got I think it's got some pretty profound social implications too, right? That there are a lot of people in the country, a lot of people in the world who don't have access to good quality primary care physicians, because maybe a 2-hour drive or a 3-hour drive away, right? And so I think that telehealth has potentially some pretty big positive social impacts. So that's about all I know about that. I know there's a bunch of HIPAA stuff, and
there is, and there's lots of regulations between different states in terms of what you can and can't do as a practitioner. But they seem to have had a good run for a while. Now the question is, where do they go?
Right.
And what differentiates one company from the next?
Right. Yep.
All right. Well, we've reached the end of the hour. It's been great talking to you, Bret. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your expertise with the SoPE audience. For SoPE members and prospective members, we are media partners with the Bio Convention. So I hope to see some of you at the Bio Convention in Boston in the beginning of June. And we are also media partners with the World Innovation Congress, another group that's meeting here in Washington, D.C. at the end of June. So please take a look at our website, and you'll see the other groups that we are affiliated with. Sometimes you can get a discount to come to those meetings. Bret, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you all attendees for joining us, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed it. Bye.
Bye.